Join us at the Darien Church of Christ, located at 537 McIntosh Road.
On Wednesday night, we were using an illustration that was from Hebrews 12, the text that we were talking about, and it was a sports illustration. But it's a sports illustration that was in the Bible, so we were stayed in tune and kept it in context, I like to think. So what we're going to talk about for today, and I encourage you, if you're not into sports, please don't tune out. It's all the Word of God. What we're going to cover is sports parallels in the Bible. Now, for those of you that are big football fans, soccer fans, baseball fans, basketball fans, I don't think any of those sports existed 2,000 years ago. So that's the illustrations you wanted. I'm sorry you missed out. But there are definitely a couple sports that seems like existed at least 2,000 years ago that are used in Scripture. And interestingly, most of the very clear illustrations are from Paul. Maybe Paul's a sports fan. Maybe Paul just was trying to appeal to people in a different way. And some of the ones I saw that were like Isaiah 40:31, where it talked about, you will run and not be weary. I don't think that's necessarily a sports illustration, but could be applied to sports. But these, I think, that we're going to use, except for maybe one, are very clearly sports illustrations. And Paul, used it to teach. And quite frankly, some guys, it's a nice way to say this, are not super bright, but if you were parallel to something they're interested in, like sports, it can resonate with them. So you might keep these in mind for people like that. This is 2 Timothy 4 and verse 7. Paul's ending his life soon. Well, he's going to have it ended by someone else. But he writes, I have fought the good fight. And so it seems that we're going to see in this at least one other verse, that there's fighting in terms of boxing. We talked about the taekwondo or whatever in class earlier, that there are different ways of fighting that have been historically in different places. But it does seem, from what we see in 1 Corinthians, that boxing was a thing within that culture. You imagine they didn't have big padded boxing gloves, so it was probably more brutal back then. But I think sometimes Christians think that we're just haphazardly going through life, things are haphazardly happening. And I think that fighting the good fight is a good illustration because it reminds us it is a fight. To be a Christian, to hold on to Jesus, to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling, then there's a fight going on, and Satan doesn't play fair. I remember one time when we were in a fraternity, we used to put on boxing gloves and we'd knock the mess out of each other for Friday nights for a couple months. And people would challenge certain people, and I think sometimes people didn't like someone or they're mad at someone that, I'm going to fight you, man. So anyway, I think this guy must have not liked me because he kept fighting and hitting me in the back of the head. And that's illegal in boxing. It really dazes you to do that. And so Satan's not fighting fair. Satan doesn't care what the rules are. God has set certain limits on what Satan can do, but Satan's going to use whatever he can to try to fight dirty against us, so to speak. So we know, like Paul did, we can fight a good fight. We can fight according to God's word. We can fight because we have the whole armor of God. These things connected to the word and righteousness that are not just defensive, they're primarily defensive weapons, but we have the sword of the Spirit is an offensive weapon. Even fencing was probably one of those things that's been a longer standing sport. But we can fight the spiritual fight. We're supposed to. We're not supposed to be passive as Christians. We're supposed to be on Jesus' side as the whole armor of God to defend us. And of course, I finished the race. We are going to finish with that Hebrews 12, what we talked about. But it does seem like, we're running this endurance race of Christianity. And a lot of people, myself included, when I was in high school, when I first started cross country is hard. It's a 3.2 mile race. That became actually very easy to run 3.2 miles. But we would train and run 7+ miles some days. And sometimes you're tired, you just start walking. You know what I mean? Your coach isn't there, whatever, I'm tired, I'm going to walk. Once I get to that mailbox down there, then I'm going to start running again. That's what I used to do. Because honestly, I didn't care that hard about being a great cross-country runner. But running, so to speak, the Christian race, we're supposed to continue on no matter how hard life gets. Because some people just stop. Some people just, go home. They quit altogether. And so we have to finish the race. We have to run. And we don't know how long our life is. We might have just one day ahead of us in our life. We might have to have 40 years. We don't know. But you just got to keep running the race and just have faith that there's going to be a finish line. If you're running with Jesus, you're going to cross that finish line and go into glory and eternity. And you can't give up on the race that's paralleled in this last part of the verse. That I've kept the faith. That all these things, paralleling these sports of boxing and running, that the idea of keeping the faith, that we're working for God in what we're doing, that we're running with effort to do what God's called us to do in this life, that we're not lackadaisical about it, that we're, fighting, realize the fight is sometimes harder than others. But we don't give up in life. We don't give up on what God wants, because this fight, this race we're running, it's worth our souls. It's worth other people's souls too, if we're helping and really ministering to people the way we could in this Christian race. So maybe Timothy likes sports, because there's 3 different times that Paul, in writing 1st, 2nd Timothy, gives a sports illustration. This is the second one from my ordered list going backwards, actually, in the Bible. 2 Timothy 2 and 5, he says, an athlete is not crowned unless he competes according to the rules. So, of course, for us, we've got gold, silver, bronze, and it's got like this ribbon, and we wear around our necks. But back then, it was like the laurel wreath. And maybe you've seen the Greeks where it's like the big thing with the olive leaves or whatever going around. And so that's how they would crown it, the winner in these things. But you have to compete according to the rules. They actually claim that marathon originated in Greek culture because they ran all the way from, I think, Sparta beat Athens. They ran from Marathon, that was the name of where the battle took place, to Athens, and it was 26.2 miles or whatever. And they announced, that the Athenians lost, and then he died. Like, he ran a marathon and died afterwards, which is really sad. But, there's rules in running marathons. I don't know if you all know, this was in the news years back, but I think it was the Boston Marathon, one of those in the Northeast, where someone cheated, and I'm not for sure he got first, but he was in the top few runners. And so he wasn't, I guess, in the top few, because in the top few, they'll drive next to him, and they got the camera going, so they're filming the runners, so the runners can't just, take a shortcut or anything. But apparently this guy caught a taxi, cut off some of the course, and then, started catching up to the other runners because he had time to take a break sitting in the taxi, wasn't running as far, it was more in striking distance. And so the guy did reasonably well, but apparently someone caught him on camera, going off the course. And so they busted him. They took away, because I guess, there's prize money for the winners, but maybe even, like certain sports is for other people below it. And so he didn't play according to the rules, and he lost. Everything, and obviously, is pretty much famous for being a cheater. And so the same is true with Christianity, is that we have to compete, quote unquote, according to God's rules. And thank God's not a competition that we're trying to defeat one another, outdo one another necessarily. But, Paul is using his illustrations that we have to do things the way that God says. If we know someone that's super prideful, we don't get to punch them in the face to help them to be more humble, right? You have to, quote unquote, compete according to the rules. And the way God said forward, we turn the other cheek, you love your enemy. These are the rules that God set forward. And obviously we've all seen teams that like to foul a lot, and they got tons of penalties and flags and free throws and all those different things that it's supposed to be penalized when people are cheating, But even when people cheat in different sports, God sees all. God is the only perfect referee. God knows what he's doing. And so for us, we can have peace in the fact that God is our judge, that God is our referee, as opposed to people in this world who might judge us unfairly. Because sometimes we are competing according to the rules and people judge us wrongly, and we can't really help it necessarily with that. So these next 2 verses, we're going to talk about strength training with it. This is 1 Timothy 4 and 8. It says, for physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things. So in King James, it actually says little. And so I always took that as like he's saying it's not good. There is some value, and the word little, of course, doesn't necessarily mean no value. That was just the way I was reading into it. There is some value in physical training. It's okay if you want to be in shape or whatever, I think you can be in shape to the glory of God, but the problem is godliness has value for all things. You think about sometimes people are more concerned about physical training or even physical appearance than godliness. And so we don't know Timothy. I'm not trying to sit in judgment on Timothy at all when I say this, but it is possible, because Paul keeps using these sports analogies, and this one paralleling physical training to godliness, that maybe Timothy was really into being in good shape. And maybe God knew and was trying to warn him, and of course the future readers of the lesson, that we have to be aware that the physical training, the time, the devotion, that everything doesn't trump godliness. Because, it's okay to be in shape, I know people, I do this for the church, but I got to go to the gym or whatever. I don't know how many Christians have really said that. But, there are people that make those decisions that they take their physical training so seriously it comes at the expense of godliness. And so even like, for example, dealing with this verse, I decided I was going to walk because it was still in the morning, it wasn't really hot over there because I knew parking was bad, the parade was going on. And I'm like, that's going to help me get in shape. I'm going to walk or whatever, But what was cool, and maybe God was working on me because of the second half of this verse, is I started to think about the people in these houses because we went door knocking not that long ago. But I don't think even when we went the first time, we made it as far down the road as where I was walking. And so I was thinking about, what if I went up to someone in their house, and I know the truth and I can teach them, what would I say? And so it was cool because even in physical training, it was helping me to be trained in godliness, at least for that stretch where I was thinking about it. Like, for example, I have a push mower. Like, quite frankly, I spend thousands on a riding mower. But more so, like it helps me get exercise. But I can be praying while I'm pushing my little mower around. If you got a riding mower, you can pray just the same. It don't matter the mower's loud. God hears your prayers, Like, you don't got to yell over your mower or you're praying or anything. So even while we're doing things that have physical training involved, we can be practicing godliness. I even know people that go to the gym and they talk to you about Jesus at the gym. I'm not a gym person. I'm not really into it. But at the same time, no matter what we do, we have to make sure that we're trying to strengthen ourselves in godliness above all things. This is a verse, this was the only one I was kind of iffy on when I was letting the internet help my searching. But this verse used to really hit me hard. And I think it's in King James, so I'm kind of tempted for it. If you got Proverbs 24:10, if you could read it in King James for us. But in this translation, ESV, it says, if you falter in a time of trouble, how small is your strength? So like, for example, I run cross country. When we run the actual races, it wasn't on like a flat level track. Like I never slipped or had any problems running in like track because they make the tracks nice and even or whatever. But in cross country, you have to run up this hill, and it's a dirt hill, and so you're running. At times it was cement, I think, the path, but at times it was dirt. And at times you could trip, you bump into somebody because you're jostling with a bunch of people. And so sometimes you could just eat it and face plant, right? If you get knocked, especially when you're running a long race, you do not want to fall down because it is not the same. You do not feel the same after you get back up and running again. Maybe unless you have the adrenaline pumping just right. But for me, like I usually just couldn't catch my stride. You have it? Can you read it for us?
Yes, New King James.
Okay, that's cool.
If you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small.
Yeah. So I like the idea of fainting as opposed to faltering, because a faint, it kind of gets the idea of like passing out, that you just couldn't handle whatever pressure there was in that situation. And so, our strength is small compared to, what God does in us, right? That we need God's strength constantly because we didn't have the strength, we couldn't do anything. But I do think there's times where we are in control. For example, soccer was my favorite sport in high school. And you all may have a negative stereotype about a certain thing in soccer that my coach was not from America, and the country was from does this, and many other countries do it more in America. They flop. Like, let's say me and Tony are running for the ball, and Tony bumps me just the littlest bit. Soccer players, and I got to roll around for like 10, 12 seconds to see if the ref will call a foul. And then if the ref doesn't call a foul, then you get back up and you run just fine because you weren't really hurt. You were just trying to draw the foul, It breaks my heart. I love soccer, but man, I played one time with a guy that every time he got close to me, he just jumped on the ground. And he never got any calls because it was obvious. He was just always jumping on the ground. I think sometimes people fall because they want the attention. I think sometimes people fall because they want to get back up. But Jesus apparently doesn't want us flopping. Jesus doesn't want us even to get hit with some force to get off course for what we're supposed to be doing for his kingdom, his mission, and his purpose. We can't be floppers in Christianity. There's even a famous basketball player that's kind of known for flopping. He's a big guy that really shouldn't get knocked down as much as he does. But we need to be people that are strong. God can keep us up. And after my coach coached us to flop, not that long after I was in a game, and this guy, he pushed me. It was a legitimate foul. He was saying to do it to draw the foul, that we're being fouled, do it. And I would not fall down. And he did have kind of a appropriate response. Like, you Americans are so prideful. Why don't you just fall down and get the whistle, But it was something about it. I'm a man, I'm not going to let him knock me down, And so in Christianity, though, because we love God, we can't let Satan knock us down. Satan might knock us down a little bit. We might stumble for a moment, but we need to keep going and to run the Christian race. So this is the longest passage I'm aware of. It's a sports parallel. This is 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 24. So Paul writes, "Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win." So I used to take the very last line in this, and I focused on that. Well, we're all Christians. We're all running a race together. We can all cross the finish line together, so to speak. And I definitely think that's true in the sense that we're not supposed to be competing against one another. We're not supposed to say, I want to do better than this person, out of pride, or that their salvation would be hindered. But when I really thought about it, when I used to run in soccer, like I was, fast, but I didn't always apply myself. If you would have to run, sometimes it was distance, sometimes it was just sprints across the field for conditioning. I wasn't always running my hardest. Like, just keeping it real. I knew at the end of the day it didn't really matter. I was fast in the game. I was going to be fast. I didn't really care. I was not running to try to win. Just being honest, because it wasn't that meaningful to me, What I think about maybe the appropriate application that I've been missing all these years is that we should be trying to follow Jesus more closely than anyone we know. Not inherently in a way that we want to do better than people or show off or anything with a negative connotation, but sometimes I was happy just running with the pack, and finishing with the pack, even though I might have had enough strength and speed at that moment to run faster. Once again, you're not leaving your Christian brothers and sisters behind. You're not not working with them and loving them and doing things with them. But to be so close to God that it might look like closer than anyone that you even know today. That I believe we all have that. We all have strengths. We all have things that we can do. We might not be able to do everything better than everyone else, of course. But sometimes we're like how I was, and just a little lackadaisical, not really trying to apply ourselves. So let's be people that take God and His Word so serious that we're running to receive the prize, that we're trying to work hard. We're not just going through the motions, just kind of like, because cutting the grass is a good example. Sometimes I'm like, close enough. And I believe that cutting the grass perfectly is not affecting my salvation or whatever, if I do it right or not. But walking with God, if our whole approach to Christianity is lackadaisical and a close enough type of attitude, the way my cutting the grass and using the weed eater is, well, that could hinder my salvation. God knows I don't really love Him that much. I'm just going through the motions, and that's good enough. So we want to run the Christian race as though we're doing it to do our best, maybe the best application. Everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. And they do claim this Greek culture that the Romans conquered, but is still present because they spoke Greek and all these different things carried over. So the modern Olympic Games are actually carried over supposedly from the ancient Greek Olympics. And so everyone who competes exercises self-control in all things. If you read about the things that certain athletes do, suppose like Steph Curry and LeBron James, like Leonardo, they sleep all night, whoever, at least sensory deprivation chambers, Michael Jackson used to have one too. What's supposed to be good for your body, how much nutrients in the water. And all. I mean, it's crazy, crazy expensive. Like, no normal person would have one in their house. But these guys are multimillionaires. They can have one in their house. They're doing all these weird things, maybe eating super healthy. Like I was told, Tom Brady eats so healthy. No matter how much you want to eat healthy, you don't want it that bad. Because his diet is so weird and so crazy, because he wanted to win so bad for so long. I had a friend of mine who competed at a very low level of college, but he still would not eat a piece of candy. I don't think he ate like a cookie, a brownie, nothing the entire time his season was going on. Because self-control was that important to him to do well in that sport. Now, these are athletes, different levels of competition, they exercise self-control in all things. It says they do it to obtain a perishable wreath. And quite frankly, the gold, silver, bronze medal is like actually worse than value in the medal. But I mean, they're getting a little plant that's going to die soon because they plucked it off the vine, It's not even that valuable, right? But we are doing it to obtain an imperishable crown. I mean, the crown of righteousness, you can't trade. There's nothing. It's of unbelievable, immeasurable worth. And so for us, if people are willing to practice self-control and all these different things, how much more should we? Like, for example, Clay got me into this video game on his phone, and I only play video games on a certain phone as part of my self-control. I don't want video games on my regular cell phone because I'll play them potentially and distract myself from more important things in life, right? So I've got my special hand-me-down from Nicole, like cell phone that me and Clay use as like a junk phone that he's got games on, and I'll play the games. But I noticed there was a point a day or two ago where I was with Anna, and like I'm supposed to be watching her. She was, messing with markers, like, and drawing on things she shouldn't. But I really wanted to play a few more minutes of my game. You know what I mean? And I noticed this internal struggle of self-control, whether I was going to finish another round of that game or like actually police my daughter as a good father should have. And so it does take more self-control than others sometimes. Thank God, God kind of convicted me, and I did what I was supposed to do. But we have to be aware of the ways that we're being pulled in different directions, and that we have to have self-control. And sometimes the areas that we're weakest or most wanting to do something that's not giving us the best focus might be the thing we have to work on the hardest. But it's worth it, right? Because, God gives us joy and peace and all these great things that you can't get from a video game, or if you feel like you are, it's just very temporary or lasting and, whatever else that thing might be for someone else. So he keeps going with the running and boxing themes. In 1 Corinthians, he says, "Therefore I run in such a way as not to run aimlessly." So, for example, I never ran a marathon. The most I ever ran without stopping is 11 miles. But if I was going to run to that window and I'm running for 26.2 miles, I'm not going to be like, I'm not running like that. I'm going to run in the straightest possible line to where I'm going. I'm not running aimlessly. That'd be crazy, right? Paul's like, I'm not running aimlessly. I'm not boxing as the one to avoid hitting the air. I didn't realize how hard boxing was until we used to do it in the fraternity. And we would only do 3 rounds. And I was so winded sometimes at the end of the 3rd round. Because you don't realize how much it is when you're like bobbing, weaving, dodging. I'm not trained for it, which probably didn't help. But you don't want to miss, right? You want to feel it hit something. You're not just going to keep swinging all the time and use all your energy that's not making a difference. And so that's the way Paul's saying. He's like, when I'm doing what I'm doing, sports parallel, but, in real life, he's not wasting his time and energy doing all kind of worthless stuff. He's trying to be focused and doing things that are important. Right. He says, I strictly discipline my body. And he goes so far, make it my slave. So that after I preach to others, I myself will not be disqualified. So it's so crazy, right? He's disciplined his body to make himself do what's right and be what's right. Like, we don't have cable TV. We haven't had cable TV most of my life, really. Do you know why? Because I watch it. I'm not streaming. I can watch other stuff sometimes. I don't watch nearly not sports that I would if I was choosing it. But, I don't know. Like, for example, I like the Lakers, sort of. I like Kevin Durant. They were playing last night. It was 8:30. I was like, you know what? I'm not staying up to watch that. My life's not going to be that much better watching that game, and because of this verse, though, really, it's because I'm trying to discipline myself, and the rest is more important to me, that I get up early, that I practice my lesson, that I do other things that are important than sitting and watch, like, that certain player in the Lakers that people seem to think is so amazing that flops sometimes. And, all these different things, that they're not really that important in life. Not to say you can't take a break and do these things sometimes, but we have to be disciplined to know what has a hold over us. If we're losing sleep for hobbies, it might not be the best hobby. If we're putting Christianity or some aspect of Christianity on hold or deferring it because of some other thing in our life, we maybe have to discipline ourselves more because, we don't want to be disqualified. And Paul, even preaching to others, doing all this great stuff, apparently had some concern that it was possible that he might be disqualified. And we don't want that to be for us. So we're going to do the last verse, is the verse that we did in class. This is Hebrews 12:1. It says, therefore, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us. Now, that may have been all the people that were in Hebrews 11. But for us, we've got people watching us every day. We probably have more people watching us than we realize. There's a police officer that moved in kitty corner across me from the street. And he don't come over and say, hey, but I feel like he'd be outside sometimes. And he, is kind of watching, but not really. I don't know if he thinks I'm, doing something bad. I don't know what it is. But, people are watching us, whether we notice it or not. It says, so let us rid ourselves of every obstacle and the sin which so easily entangles us. As we talked about on Wednesday night, the sin is obvious to get that out of our lives. But sometimes, you're running in a race. You're not going to carry an extra bag or an extra backpack when you're running. There's just no point. You're just weighing yourself down. You're hurting yourself, literally, right? And so there's certain things like the video game or whatever that's an obstacle. There's a point because in the video game, you have to, pay a certain number of points to enter a certain, competition. And so this one was, a lot more points and I lost. So I lost a lot of coins. I was trying to get a certain number of coins, which once again is absolutely meaningless. But it hit me, maybe God allowed me to lose that, so I don't have to be as into this video game anymore. And I haven't played it almost at all since then, And so we can rid ourselves, and sometimes God might help us along the way, especially when we're asking and praying for His help, right? And let's run with endurance the race that is set before us. I'd always run with endurance in the sense I think that we could, I used to run the 800, which is 2 laps around the track. I always had a faster time on the first lap than the second lap. Do you know why? Because I'm in reasonably good shape at that point in high school. I'm running hard, but man, suck in some air that second lap, because you're supposed to finish sprinting, the end of the race. But man, it was in my body I was trying to sprint, but my body was not responding with all the energy it had in that first lap. And some people, I think they get wore out. They don't know how to pace themselves. No. Even trying to do the thing yesterday, I know I can't be out in the heat all day long. And honestly, I was going to be out there even less than I chose to, but God gave me the endurance. But toward the end, toward 5 o'clock, I was starting to feel kind of faint. I'm like, brother, you okay if we just sit out these last 5 miles of water? He's go. He's like, okay, we're good. Because we did a lot of good, right? But we made it, as far, and God still got us alive. We're still here today. We got to be able to pace ourselves and run with endurance and have wisdom. Not to spend ourselves in fruitless endeavors, but not to waste all of our energy to where we wear ourselves out. There is some sort of pacing that's involved, sort of wisdom in how we run this Christian race. This may be a little bit tough to explain if you've never seen the movie, but I hope you've seen this scene. This is from the original Rocky. So Sylvester Stallone, he's a young guy in this movie, and he's trained to be this boxer, to beat some great boxer guy. This is a guy that's training, that's holding a chicken. So now, Rocky doesn't have a lot of money or whatever. It's not like they're in a fancy gym or whatever. So they have this little penned-off area, and Rocky's job is to catch the chicken. Rocky is not at all good at catching the chicken. The chicken's just, quite frankly, a little bit smarter and faster in the movie than Rocky is. And Rocky's chasing it around and just can't do it. But the problem wasn't just that the chicken was a tiny bit faster. The chicken had better technique than Rocky did. Yeah, and so the chicken, if Rocky would start to catch up to him, the chicken would dodge just at the right time. Right. And Rocky just wasn't anticipating it. And so if you go back, I haven't seen it in years, but if you go back and watch the movie, Rocky started to anticipate when the chicken was going to turn and cut it off. Yeah. And that's how he can catch the chicken. Okay. In Christianity and in all things of life, it's better, if possible, to work smarter, not harder. Because we can wear ourselves out trying to do all these good things without wisdom. Yeah. There's a verse in Ecclesiastes where it says, the axe is dull, more strength is required, but wisdom will help one to succeed. I had my next door neighbor literally help me with that. I was chopping with the axe. He's like, why don't you bring the axe over? I got a tool you can sharpen it with. And man, it was so much easier to sharpen once I sharpened that axe. Woo! But times in life we want to do good. We want to compete well. So they even have log splitting competitions. There's so many parallels we can take for all these sports and different activities of life, and Paul and the Spirit do it in different ways. But really what it comes down to is, are we walking with God with all of our heart? And are we doing it with wisdom? Because we're doing our best using the wisdom from God, there's nothing more we can do. But sadly it's tempting not to use wisdom if it takes time or effort to acquire the wisdom. Sadly, sometimes people don't want to learn from their mistakes, because in doing so they're admitting they're making a mistake. But they say to know better, to do better, right? And so wherever we're at spiritually, I think we can always run the race better. We can always be stronger. We can always have this idea of what Christianity looks like, to read the Bible. Because I've never, for all my 27 years of being a Christian, thought my life of continuous day looked exactly like Jesus. Because he was so radically different. He loved people so deeply, went so far on his way to do things and to teach people. We can all run this race like Jesus. But it's going to take more effort, more wisdom, more prayer, more discernment. Because, it is sometimes giving over at first, like Hebrews talk about, just that one thing sometimes, that's that thing that, might be, okay, maybe this is the thing that's entangling me right now, or the most significant thing from a full walk with God, and I can let that go. because we know by faith that God's ways and thoughts are better than ours, because he tells us that, and I've seen in my life over and over when I've been hard-headed. And so we get to change and adapt to do God's plan. And I find so much joy and so much peace in doing it. Like even the different people that we talked to yesterday, like I love doing that. Honestly, there's a part of me that's like, why don't I go out to more events and set up a table? But it's once again having that prayerful wisdom and discernment and discipline and practice to be able to know how do I apply this well to the glory of God. But thank God he's willing to forgive us when we fall short, but we can't continue in it, the grace may abound. There's no use running that race with all the extra weight, all the extra sin or whatever else might get in the way. So let's be people that run the race with patience, run it with wisdom, run it with love. And of course, the Bible talks about us being baptized into Christ, that in this we start the race on God's team, so to speak, but really the biblical language is his family, as his son or his daughter, that we get to be inheriting eternal prizes of great glory waving on some little olive branch on our head. So if there's anyone that you're struggling in running this Christian race or anything you walk with God and you want any help, feel free to come forward as we stand and sing the song of Christian.
Join us at the Darien Church of Christ, located at 537 McIntosh Road.